Welcome to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. This show is about bringing inspirational, creative, successful, and happy health professionals to you. Get ready to learn how you can be a happy doctor too. Hello everyone. For our episode today, we are absolutely excited to have our next guest, Dr. Michael Ehrenreich. He is a practicing dermatologist, and he has his own practice called Soma Skin and Laser. He is also the creator of Medicine the Musical. Medicine the Musical is set to a dynamic rock score, and it follows a group of first-year medical students as they struggle with their lives, loves, and the rigors of their education. We're absolutely excited to get to know Dr. Michael Ehrenreich, his daily life as a dermatologist, and also how he went on to create something like a musical for medicine. It's still in production, and that's really exciting for anyone listening today because they can be a part of the Kickstarter campaign that they have launched in order to fund Medicine the Musical. This is a really great opportunity for our medical culture to come together and support someone on their creative path. I know that I'm going to be buying a ticket on the Kickstarter campaign, and I think you guys should too. You can find their information at www.medicinethemusical.com, and there's a link for their Kickstarter on the website. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Michael Ehrenreich. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Taylor Brana, and this is another episode of the Happy Doc. I'm very excited for our next guest, Dr. Michael Ehrenreich. He is a dermatologist, but he also is creating Medicine the Musical, and we're going to get into that during this conversation. Dr. Michael Ehrenreich, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Awesome. So to begin, I believe you're our first dermatologist, so that would actually be a great place to start. So what got you interested in medicine and then eventually into dermatology?
Medicine for me is actually a second career. So it's interesting, that we're talking about a quest for fulfillment in medicine. And for me, I was drawn to medicine as a place to find fulfillment, actually. So I was originally a investment professional. I worked in finance for many years. And I did biotechnology and healthcare and medical device investing. And then when I was 32, I had an opportunity to get out of that business. And I went to medical school at that age. And as I went through school, dermatology presented itself as a possibility. And I find it a very fulfilling specialty because it has a lot of different elements from, the medical to the surgical to the procedural. So I found it a good fit for me.
Awesome. So for everyone listening, how long have you been in practice for as an attending physician in dermatology?
So I started my practice as Soma Skin and Laser in Millburn, New Jersey, which I started right out of residency. And March will be my 7th anniversary.
Wow. Wonderful. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So that's interesting. You talk about it's your practice, correct?
Correct.
So one thing I'm hearing this day and age is it's very difficult to build, your own practice. Everyone's saying you can't do private or you can't build something. Can you just talk about the difficulties of building, practice or how you've been able to build something within this day and age?
Sure. I mean, I do hear that, and I feel that I'm already a dinosaur, as a solo practitioner. But certainly it helped that I had some resources going in, because I had been in business and working beforehand, because you have to be able to lose money for a little bit of time. It took me about 9 months, I think, to get to break even on my practice. And I wasn't working anyplace else at that time, let alone the investment that I had to put into the practice. So I had some resources available. I don't know for other people, how much the banks are lending and things like that today.
Sure.
But you certainly have to be prepared to sustain some losses for a little while. You also, I think, have to take advantage of technology today so that, things that were once very difficult, billing and reimbursement, with today's EMRs, which are difficult for some people and there's an investment involved, but they really make the workflow a lot easier. I'm not staying late writing notes. It goes with the flow of the practice. I spend an extra, 20, 30 minutes at the end of the day finishing my work. But that sort of investment in kind of workflow, I think, is very important. I've been fortunate, I think, too, just in terms of, luck, being in a good place and, the practice, was built. I don't know how easy it is to replicate anymore today. I certainly hear what you're saying, that it's hard to be a sole practitioner. But I personally think that it's very important that physicians continue to try to be sole practitioners or group practitioners and keep the reins of medicine within the hands of physicians, and somewhat out of the hands of investors and administrators.
Beautiful. So I love that we're talking about this because, one of the reasons we have discussions with doctors on this podcast is a huge discussion around autonomy and how to retain autonomy within the work that you do. And I love that you're bringing this up. That's why I'm so curious, because I'm definitely interested in, what can we do to retain that autonomy, whether it's, building your own practice or, you mentioned some of these tools that streamline the process, not necessarily always having to do everything in line with insurance companies and those types of things because you've built your own practice, I'm sure that's definitely changed your quality of life.
Yeah, well, certainly, I hear from a lot of people that work, for hospitals or group practices, and that autonomy is disappearing for a lot of people. And, certainly being a sole practitioner, sometimes being in business for yourself, I say, is the right to get paid last. So, I got to pay all my overhead and all my employees before I get paid. So you lose some amount of that security, maybe of getting a salary working for a big group or a hospital. But, I make my own hours. I set my own pace. I decide how many patients I'm going to see a day. In a sense, I decide how much money I want to earn. And when people, let's say, interview with me sometimes, other dermatologists, out of residency looking, if I have an opportunity for them. And, today there are big practices in dermatology too. It's being rolled up by private equity. And, I say to them that you're going to spend more time at your place of employment, at your practice, than you're going to spend with your family. And it's probably going to be the biggest single determinant of your happiness in life. And I like to think that, whether it's, dermatology, which is, of course, one of the better specialties in medicine, agreed upon. But whatever it is, I like to think that there's enough money in whatever style of practice you choose that you shouldn't be driven solely by the money. And I tell them, you might be going to this practice and they're offering you, this amount of money. Think about how many patients maybe they expect you to see a day if they're going to be paying you that much money. And what that's going to mean to your quality of life. I mean, nobody gets something for nothing. So the most important thing is to find a place that's a fit. The other thing I find is that doctors, especially, coming out of residency and in those first few years and even later, are very fearful. We're a profession that comes out with a lot of skills, but very little knowledge or awareness of how the world works in terms of business and processes. And for that reason, doctors are very vulnerable, actually, to being taken advantage of by institutions and savvy business people. And you have to, educate yourself to a certain degree about, what's available. And if somebody gives you X dollars, how they're going to make that money back off you. And they plan to make that money back somehow. So you got to choose a practice environment first and foremost, as opposed to, going for the quick money. And when I said that, doctors are fearful. So they might take like a job, and very often that first job is a lot like being in an unhappy marriage. It's not working, but they're afraid to leave it. And I find that those first positions are very sticky. So people will stay for years and years in a bad situation because they're not, clear about where to go or what the alternative is. And, my feeling is, like most bad situations in life, if you find yourself that you've made a mistake out of residency or you're in an environment that you don't like, the first thing to do is get out of there. when I was an investment professional, I read, like everybody else, the annual report of Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's corporation. And one thing stuck with me, these many years. He was talking financially, but it applies to everything. Mm-hmm. If you find yourself in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. And that's I think, a good piece of advice. So if you find yourself in a hole in your profession, in your life, whatever it is, don't dig yourself in deeper. Get yourself out somehow.
Wow. I mean, you just left so much valuable information. I'm really excited you're with us today. I can totally understand where you're coming from, especially with the students in this day and age. Definitely a lot of fear in the discussion, a lot of concern, a lot of worry. And you touched on also the skills that, we're learning the medical skills. We're learning the medical education and the knowledge. We're all studying for boards exams. We're making sure we know those things. But I definitely echo in terms of the life skills. I think there's a huge gap in those things. And I think that's also an interesting advantage that you had going from more of the business investment piece and then going into medicine. Would you agree with that?
I would. Both having the skills, but also not having the fear that others might have. It wasn't, starting a practice for me wasn't the first business that I started, nor was it actually the most difficult. So I had some advantage in life experience in that regard. And it's very scary, putting in money and betting on any business. In medicine today, a practice is a small business, mm-hmm. and you have to have those skills. A generation ago or two, you didn't have to be, savvy to make money in medicine. Everybody, the worst doctor, the worst administrative skill doctor, whose office was a mess of clutter and paper, somehow still seemed to be making a good living. And today I think it's more difficult. You got to run an efficient operation. And, the administrative overhead in medicine and the regulatory overhead in medicine has become, ever increasing. And I think that, whether it's orchestrated to be this way or not, the message that's going out there is you can't do it yourself anymore. You need to be part of a team and a system. And certainly medicine is a team and it's a system, but you could be a part of that system. I still think in many specialties, in a practice environment where you have autonomy. And, again, I'm by myself. I have a nurse practitioner with me, mm-hmm. Which gives me some support and backup. But, it's not entirely wonderful to be by yourself completely. If you want to go away or, take mm-hmm. off, you worry a lot about the practice. Yeah. But probably, I think a small group environment of physician-owned, physician-managed practices is the best way to do it. And we, as a profession, just have to believe that we can do this, that we can do this without administrators and without investors, and take control and ownership of our profession before we lose it. And that's what's happening in the world today.
And I think, again, there's another large gap, which is how do you do it in 2018, for example? And if you're working, for example, for a hospital, it's not necessarily in their best interest to offer you that education, right? Like, if you're working, long hours and all those things, they're not going to bring in someone, how do you build your own solo practice, So, it's definitely a self-education or finding the right mentorship or looking into it yourself, which, definitely is difficult given like a lot of the time crunch that a lot of physicians face.
Right. And like I said, I don't know whether this is orchestrated by the environment that we're in, that we're being given this messaging that, you can't do it anymore. I don't know what the statistics are. 60% of doctors, I think, are no longer, are working for employers today. Mm-hmm. And I believe that, with a will and with education, a good amount of doctors can be in a different, more autonomous, more fulfilling practice environment.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for those valuable tips. And so to move forward, I believe that you having this business and developing your own hours obviously gives you some leeway and some free time. And I'm sure that built into you being able to create the medicine, the musical. And I want us to get into that. Before we get there, though, what got you interested in music in the first place?
Well, I have actually not much in the way of formal musical training. Huh. I took music lessons as a kid. I took, I think, a couple of years it was of clarinet. And, I didn't necessarily love it when I was doing it at the time. But later in life, like many things that you learn, you realize that you have a foundation that you can build on later. And when I was a young adult in my 20s, I bought a guitar and took a few lessons on that. Bought a keyboard, took 1 or 2 lessons on that. And over the years, I've mostly taught myself. And when I was in medical school, I would just make up some stupid songs, none of them which are in the musical, but I would like hum these stupid songs to my wife. And there was a joke that, there should be medicine in the musical, it's a dramatic environment. And then, 7-10 years later, this was a year and a half ago. So a year ago from this past summer, my wife and 2 kids went away for a week in the summer to visit her parents in Michigan. So I was left alone. And so in the evenings, I had a lot of free time. That was usually family time or with the kids. And I sat down and I started writing. And in a week, I wrote half of this musical. When it comes, it comes, right?
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then over about 3 months, I finished it. And wow. Then the question is, as somebody who's a doctor or previously, an investor, I know nothing about theater or how to get a musical produced or what you do with one. And so I started researching and reading and investigating and talking to people. And I learned that it's really, really hard. The amount of money involved, let's say, to get a Broadway show up, is in $10 million range. Wow. Off Broadway is still, hundreds of thousands of dollars to put on like a first class off Broadway production. But the first thing that I realized you have to do is a show, whether it's theater or a musical, it kind of lives on its feet. You got to see it. You got to have actors perform it. So I organized, I guess I became a producer in a small sense. I produced a staged reading. And a staged reading is when the work is performed, it's fully read and sung, and we have musicians and a theater and an audience, but they're on book. So they have music stands in front of them and they're reading the book or singing the music. There's not much in the way of choreography. There's no costuming, but you kind of really see the piece, and it's got 80% or so of the value of interpreting it of a fully staged production. So we did that this past April in New York at the Darrell Roth Theater. Wow. And we did two presentations of it in one day, which is recorded, and you can see it at medicinethemusical.com/video. And it came out really, really well. And, I got good feedback on it. And I got constructive feedback too, both, seeing it for the first time myself, as well as, feedback from other people, made some tweaking, to the book and, move some things around a little bit. And that's kind of the purpose of a reading. Wow. And then came the next step. So now I've done a reading. Well, now what? And, So I actually put together, I learned more about the business of musical theater, and it's a business like anything else. So, so I had to make offering documents to try to raise money for it, like you would do for a public offering or something. But then I went around talking to people, and, I was trying to raise a few $100,000. And in theater, if you say, hey, would you like to invest in my musical? No matter how many times you say invest, most people hear the word donate. So I said, if people are kind of hearing the word donate anyway, and it's kind of hard to get people to put in a large sum of money, maybe we should try this as a Kickstarter. And that's what I'm doing right now. So I launched a Kickstarter for this, hoping that we can get small amounts of money. Essentially, I'm practically selling tickets. You could back it for $25, $35 and get a ticket to the show when we put it on. And I'm hoping that if we can get enough of that together, we could put up a decent show. And kind of the scale of what I'm going to do depends on how much money comes in. If we get a relatively modest sum, we'll do what I would call a workshop production, which is kind of the next step up from a staged reading. Everybody's off book. There's choreography, there's costuming, there's some scenery, but much more minimal than you'd have for a Broadway or an off-Broadway production. And if we get a good amount of money, we could do a real off-Broadway presentation.
Amazing. I mean, I'm really excited about what you're doing for so many reasons. Number one, it's the opposite of the fear conversation that everyone's having. You're doing the opposite of that. You're not only are you a practicing physician, but you you wrote the musical and then you actually decided to go for it and start to work on the process, and you've built out a completely new skill. I'm interested, like, how did you collect all of these singers, for example? Did you have a connection with that, or?
No. So again, it's like if you're starting your practice, you probably don't have a connection with a billing manager.
Sure.
You have to go and find the right person. And I'll go on a brief aside before I answer your question,
Sure.
which is you're back to like, how do you start your practice? And a lot of people, when they start out in things, are very bounded by who they know. What's your network? Who do I know who can do that?
Mm-hmm.
What you'll find is that your network is very limited. And when you go out to do something, your question has to be, well, who's the right person for this? Or what are the characteristics of the right person for this? Then you have to go out and find them. And that's, the hiring and recruiting process for anything. So when it came to doing a musical or a stage reading, first thing I did was I ran an ad for it in, I think, Playbill, which is like an industry publication. And I located a director and a music director and brought them on board. And they knew some people that they had worked with before. So we cast some of the roles that way. But then about half the roles were still open. So we did a casting call, like for anything else. And except instead of, typically this would be done in a rehearsal room with a session pianist, and you'd spend a few $1,000s on this process. Today, thankfully, with video and technology, everybody's got a video reel that they could send you. If they don't, then you probably don't want them. So I did it. I cast it all based on video submissions. Wow. And again, it was just a stage reading. We didn't have that much on the line. I wouldn't do that if I was doing a $10 million Broadway musical.
Right.
But it worked out very well. So I cast it based on that. And everybody, I thought, if you watch the video, everybody was, I think, top-notch talent.
Yeah, I mean, and I did get to listen to a lot of the music, and I have to say I was very impressed with the singing. I thought everyone just did such a great job. And so did they all come together and practice beforehand, or did they just go for it?
No. So, I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't just
I figured, yeah.
No, so this represents the stage reading is about a week of rehearsals in a rehearsal studio.
I mean, that's pretty amazing for a week. I have to say, you guys, I mean, I've sang in choir before and actually sang in medical school as well. And they did a really, I was very impressed with their singing talent. That was great. And I listened to some of the songs. So some of the songs are just so interesting to me. First Year Sucks. So this takes place in first year, right? The musical?
Right. The whole setting is essentially from the beginning to the end of first year and a cohort, if you will, of medical students.
Yeah. So there's a song, First Year Sucks, and it goes through that process, and see one, do one, teach one. And I just loved some of the titles of the songs. So I'm sure people are going to enjoy it. And, for all the listeners today, I'm letting you know I'm buying a ticket. So
thank you.
Yeah, so we'll start there. And I want everyone else to also check out the Kickstarter and purchase tickets as well. So let's move on a little bit here. Medicine the Musical is just such a large production, and it's just so big. I think people don't often think like that. What got you inspired to think in a bigger picture manner like that?
Well, a lot of it, in terms of the scale of the production, I'd say a lot of it was ignorance. When you talk to people familiar with off-Broadway production, the first thing that they tell me when they look at the show is it's too big for off-Broadway. The numbers don't work. When you sit down and write something, at least the first time you do it, you don't think about what's it going to cost to put this up? How many, I got to pay all those actors eventually. And, so it's difficult. But basically the piece mostly wrote itself. And that's kind of how my writing process works. You start with something and then it expands out. So it's got kind of the scope, scale, and the number of people that it took to tell the story. And that's the thing about a musical. It's not a concert. A musical has a story. And there is actually a very important storyline in here, which you don't necessarily get just by listening to a few songs. You can get it by watching the full stage reading. But you get a real sense of the stress and the pressure. And you get a little bit of that in First Year Sucks, what's in store for people. But you get a sense of the pressure that people feel as a medical student and not so much we don't talk about it as practicing physicians, though there's some of that in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's for it takes the general public, when they come to see it, a little bit inside the world that's very close to a lot of people. You could watch Scrubs from today till tomorrow, right? But you don't really get a sense of what it's like to be a medical student. And I'm not saying that watching a musical is going to give you that either, but it's actually a serious piece, and in certain senses, and gives you some insight into what's going on in the mind of a medical student and what they need to deal with.
Wow. And I love that because, so often, and I see lots of blog posts about this, I've written about it as well. There's a lot of difficulty with someone like a parent or a friend or, a family member who's never been in the field of healthcare and then tries to empathize with you in some way or try to understand why you're so busy all the time and why you can't see them and those types of things. And something like this that can kind of pull you into that world, that's really powerful.
And I think that when people see it, I mean, obviously it's fictionalized. It's not really representative. It's a musical. We don't walk around singing in the hospital. But there's entertainment value to it, but there's some serious message in there as well.
That's amazing. Yeah. So we'll definitely have people check that out, and we're going to provide the link in the show notes for this as well. So in a bigger picture sense, who inspires you and why?
That's a hard question. And it's going to sound like I'm a complete narcissistic guy, but the truth is I got nobody. I'm very internally driven. I don't take my inspiration from outside sources. Wow. I've always just been very internally driven. And so I can't really answer that question. I don't have, it sounds terrible, I know, but I don't have role models. And it's not a failing necessarily of people that have tried to teach me and train me over the years. But it's very difficult for me to look back and say, this person was a mentor to me, and I am today who I am because of this person. And, many people have that. It's not to diminish the role of that. And it's just maybe in my life that never happened or never clicked. And that might be, in fact, a good part of who I am. Maybe because I never had that mentorship from someone, that I've become very much an internally driven and an internal process. Why I have the drives that I do or the processes that I do, I can't say. I'll leave it for the psychiatrist to unravel me. But I can't answer your question easily.
No, I mean, and there's something to that, because you're internally processing, that plays to a strength, which is you don't have to have other people tell you how to live your life, or you don't really look at the opinions of other people. And that actually makes a lot of sense, maybe why, you could go through and build your practice and go through and do a musical, because for you were able to find that information inside yourself, which is a really beautiful thing.
I think that at the heart of a lot of motivation, in a certain sense, is envy. Whether it's not somebody who inspires me necessarily, but when I see, anything well done, I see somebody who's at the top of their game, a piece of music that I love, and you look at it and say, boy, I wish I could have done something like that. And then you try and you do your best to be the best that you can be. And you may never reach the level of whatever it is, but I think that admitting that you're envious of things is not a bad thing. It's not petty like people make it out to be. Envy, I think, drives us. Not envy like I want your car or I want your house, but envy like, wow, this person's achieved so much. I'd like to be like that. Yeah,
no, that's amazing. And I think the real difference here is not only are you experiencing that, but you're acting on it and you're building something, which is again, maybe it doesn't drive you when you listen to someone that's inspirational, but I know it drives a lot of people. So, they'll get a lot out of this for sure. So what do you think it takes, in this podcast, we discuss feeling fulfilled. What do you think it takes to feel like a fulfilled physician?
Well, I think being a fulfilled physician is probably not that different from being a fulfilled person. And I think that that's probably the first thing to think about is, you can't necessarily define yourself by your profession. And this is I've learned actually a very American way to view the world. In the first 2 minutes of a meeting with someone, you'll usually ask or be asked, what do you do? And I've actually learned that that's a rude question in a lot of other parts of the world. And I think that is a question of how we frame our lives. And very much, I think here in America, we tend to define ourselves by what we do. And the first thing that I would say is that that's probably not a great idea. I think that people are a collection of roles that we play. And, everybody, you put on the white coat and, you play a role, and the patients want you to play that role too. You're the doctor, you're the expert. But when you take off the coat, you're a person, and you should have a life that doesn't involve you wearing the coat. And I don't think that you could be fulfilled completely if, your entire fulfillment is coming only from your professional life. So, certainly, like I said earlier, you spend a lot of time in that professional environment, more than you do probably anywhere else. So you certainly need to be fulfilled there. But I think that you also have to have interests, whether it's, hobbies, writing musicals, doing sports, and people, friends, family, that you're going to find fulfillment from. The other thing I said, and this might go a little counter to my envy statement earlier, I wasn't talking about physical things when I talked about envy. I wasn't talking about like envying a car or a house. And I think that it's very important to be content with your lot in life, with regard to particularly physical things. And if you're very driven, financially, if you're very driven by having the nice things or the trendy things, it's a recipe for unhappiness. And, a patient who's a friend of mine came to my office once. I was treating him at the end of the day for something, and then we were going to go out. And he walks me to my car, which is a 2002 Honda CR-V, dented up. And he's like, "Oh my God, this is your car?" I'm like, I don't care. Like I drive a 2002, I drive the worst car in my office. My staff drives nicer cars than me. And like, I just don't get fulfillment from something like that. Yeah. A car is a method of transportation. So I think that if you find yourself very caught up in material things, it's going to be very hard to find fulfillment, because there's always going to be somebody with more stuff than you.
Wow. Well, beautifully said. I love that. And I liked how you reframed the question too. It's not just a fulfilled physician, because underneath, we're a person. No, that's a great way of phrasing it. So you mentioned earlier, and I'm very curious about this, in building out a business, or, what you're using currently, what are some tools that maybe you're using or utilizing that people might not know about that you found useful?
Well, I think everybody knows about EMRs today. And, we're one of the last professions, to go for many kicking and screaming into the digital world. I don't think it's going to be a problem, for younger physicians coming out, but certainly there was a big transition, and still is, for older doctors, both in terms of their comfort level with technology, as well as the investment at a certain stage in your career or in your practice to say, I'm going to spend all this money, convert all these charts. So I started, and you're all starting at a point when electronic medical records were available. I never had a sheet of paper for a patient in my office practically. It's all electronic. And, there are perils of electronic note taking. You all do it in the hospital, I'm sure. I'm sure the issue of like cloning notes has come up for many of you. Yes. Where you cut and paste, and then you don't, put in a full thought on it, and that's a danger in private practice too. But if you use it like it's meant to be used, as a tool to increase your productivity, you make up templates, that help you chart quickly. It really saves a lot of time in your day. So that's important. The other thing is that the electronic medical records programs today either are integrated with a suite of a practice management, which handles the billing and the scheduling side, or it syncs with another one. I wanted one that was integrated. I didn't want to have to deal with two vendors on it, and if they're not syncing, who do you call? So I would suggest you get one that everything is integrated. But in the past, you would pay a lot of money to a billing company, 7% or something like that. And I think a lot of practices still use it, but it's very easy to do it in-house today. It's all done electronically. There's no paper involved. So we do all of our billing in-house, and that saves on outsourcing it. Obviously, you need an employee to do it, but I feel no one's going to really care as much about your collections as you do.
Yeah.
An outside agency, I don't think is going to do the same job or with the same nuance. So certainly, you could do that. The other thing is, so as part of that, we have laptops or tablets, that follow you around when you're seeing patients. So things get charted, mostly as you go. And in my profession, which is very visual, in my specialty, we take pictures of everything. If you read 10-year-old journals, you'll find all sorts of archaic articles about photography and slides. And, today, it's wonderful. I don't even write down things that you would find in, let's say, like old notes. Why am I going to bother writing down how big a lesion is when I have a picture of it with a ruler next to it? Right. Yeah. So I'll just write, irregular, macule, and I'll go to the picture if I need to, find the size sometimes. So that also saves, why document things in 5 different ways.
No, that's a great point. So, I'm not at the level, of course, where I'm building a practice yet or anything like that. But so there are tools which will go like top to bottom, essentially like have a patient sign in, plug that into an EMR and integrate that whole process, and also to be able to, I'm sure it might be a different tool as well, but like, finances and accounting that basically remove a lot of the redundancy you'd have from other people and basically streamlines the process, reduces overhead.
I think so. I mean, definitely everything from scheduling to billing to collections, and certainly analytics, that you might want to see as a business person,
right?
What your main billing codes are. Many of them will have marketing elements to them, so you could track like where your patients are coming from, things like that. I would suggest, strongly that everybody who's starting a practice get some basic working knowledge of accounting. Have some mastery of your own numbers. You don't have to do your own accounting, but don't be like don't be at the mercy of your accountant or your bookkeeper to tell you what's going on. You should know really day to day where your practice is, just like any business owner would know day to day how much money you have in the bank, how much collections, how much receivables. So you got to know these things like anybody else, and don't rely entirely on your practice manager. But that's a skill. A lot of people just want to go out and practice, and I mean that's okay. But then you're going to be an employee, right? If you want to be a business owner, you got to have some of these skills.
Right. And I think, a big theme we're getting out of this conversation is, you have to build out those life skills, right? And it's so important. And we might not be handed those skills, but we have to teach we're going to have to find a way to teach ourselves, whether it's through another process or reading or what have you. But that's definitely a theme I'm getting from this conversation. And
I think doctors are great self-learners. That's one of the things that we were taught is, how to learn and how to continue to learn as we go out and practice, continuing medical education, which hopefully everybody does. But it's the same thing. I mean, we know how to acquire new skills, and only a fraction of what you need in medicine are you ever going to be taught in medical school or in residency. You got to get it on your own. And it's the same thing with these other skills. We're all capable of reading an article or buying a college textbook on accounting or finance or marketing or whatever it is, and filling in these skills. We're all capable of it.
That's wonderful. So before we finish the conversation for today, what would be a tip you'd like to leave with the listeners?
Oh, a tip. The tremendous power of a little bit every day. And, how do you accomplish anything? And, every task seems insurmountable when you start it, including medical school, right? And I think we've all had, often for me, it wasn't gross anatomy. You sit down and you're like, how am I going to know all this? And the answer is a little bit at a time. and you take it one piece at a time. And that's the same for anything that you're going to do, any new life skill. But there's an importance of discipline to the process. You want to write something, write every day for 5 minutes. You want to play music, practice every day for 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, a language, anything. Those numbers just like accumulate. 10 minutes a day for a year of focused minutes doing something, and everybody's got those 10 minutes. You could find those 10 minutes sometimes. I mean, maybe my practice isn't as busy as some other people, but if I have a patient that doesn't show up and I've got 10 minutes on my hand, I'm doing something. I'm not on social media or watching cute cat videos. I'm using that time, and I call that the time between the time, right? In an 8-hour day, a lot of people have a lot of wasted time, and if you figure out processes to harness that in your day, you have something, a journal. Even if it's just continuing education, I always have a journal on my desk. I always have, something open, a lecture that I'm listening to, or something like that, and use those moments. And you come home and it's late, you're tired, but if there's something that you want to do, you find those 10 minutes, and there's always 10 minutes.
Wow. I love that tip. That's great. So, before we close out, where can people find you and specifically Medicine the Musical?
So you can find Medicine the Musical at medicinethemusical.com. There's a link to our Kickstarter there. So please back the show. You can find me at somalaser.com. And, I'm very available. If anybody, is starting a practice or I've been on this group physician side gigs, people trying to do other things, besides medicine. And that's great, to enrich their lives, whether it's businesses. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm very available and happy to help people, try to achieve whatever they're trying to achieve. I love startups of all types, businesses, creative things. I like those first steps of going from nothing to something. And if I can help somebody, just give me an email.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Michael Ehrenreich. We really appreciate having you, and that was a phenomenal conversation.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to the Happy Doc podcast, the voice of fulfilled physicians. If you enjoyed the episode, please drop us a like, comment, and share. Share us through the social media channels we have on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The handle is at Happy Doc Podcast. That's at Happy Doc Podcast. You can find our website at www.thehappydoc.com. Again, thank you so much for listening to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians.